This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
I'm being very meticulous right now. Right before I sat down to record, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and it filled pretty much all the way to the top of the coffee mug. So I am trying to gently pick this up without causing any total horrors. I think I sipped it down a bit so that it wasn't going to overflow, but it's kind of pretty close there for a second there. I was getting a little anxious. Still tastes like coffee, but got a little dicey there. You know, it's interesting sometimes. For as long as I've been doing this, I cannot think of a time where I have been so divided on the state of modern wrestling. You know, people often like to compare WWE and AEW, the whole debate over which company's worse. And any rational-minded person would probably be able to sit here and tell you they both equally suck. But I mentioned before how it's a different level of suck when it comes to both products. And especially after last weekend, watching that AEW pay-per-view, my God. That was on par with watching the dying days of WCW. That one came off like a Bash at the Beach 2000 level bad, where there was just so much about that show that was awful from start to finish. There's no way to work around it. You can't even laugh, the show was so bad. You know, with WWE, it's the kind of suck where everything you see is so watered down and so boring. Normally, you don't get your intelligence insulted because there's still a modicum of professionalism that happens on that show from week to week. But you get done watching a Raw or a SmackDown, and you never get the sense that anything important really ever happened, outside maybe one or two things. Normally accounting for the bloodline, because that's the only thing in WWE that matters at this point. Now, I am going to say, this week's SmackDown had one of the greatest segments of all time, and it was the kind of train wreck level comedy where the segment itself was so awful, it actually transcended that and became great by comparison because I was in so much pain from laughing. You can all start venturing a guess as to what segment that was. But the point is, AEW and WWE don't really live in an echo chamber when it comes to the bad content. It's unprofessional bad with AEW versus monotonous, dull, and lifeless bad WWE. I think it's just a matter of which one you're down for more often than not. Do you prefer the ADHD level of in-your-face horror that Tony Khan presents us every Wednesday night? Or do you prefer the watered-down, cookie-cutter, unexciting Vince McMahon-inspired product? To be frank, I still don't know which one I prefer. AEW gives me migraines, but WWE gives me diarrhea more often than not. Because I watch SmackDown and I'm like, why do I all of a sudden have the strong urge to go to the bathroom? Probably because I'm looking to avoid most of the underneath guys that are booked to wrestle on that show every week. And the girls. We'll talk about that show after we get done with Retro Raw. And since this is the WWE-themed Monday show, we are still working through the archives of the Retro Raw programming. They are definitely WWF shows circa mid-90s. It's a whole lot of nothing going on, surrounded by even more hokiness and wackiness. It just drives you up a wall if you don't get accustomed to it. Which perfectly segues us into this week's wacky, wonderful world of WWF Raw. And if you'll briefly recall from last week, the only major thing of note on the entire show was the story development with Crush and Tatanka in the King of the Ring qualifier. A match that ended in a double countout after both men decided to just completely ignore the referee's count and continue to fight on the floor. Naturally, they were both rewarded for this by being given a second chance at not being two complete dumbasses. So that led us to this week's Raw, where both men had yet another King of the Ring qualifier. This time, it was sanctioned under a lumberjack rules match to ensure that both men were kept inside the ring at all times. And when you factor in that it is a lumberjack match, the thing you're mainly keeping your eyes peeled for are all the guys out on the floor. And among the regular suspects you would expect to see outside the ring as part of this match, the IRSs, the Doinks, the Mabels, the Atom Bombs of the world. Mainly the underneath guys that don't really contribute too much to the TV show outside the normal squashes here and there. We also had guys like Razor Ramon and poor old Yokozuna out there, making me realize that Yokozuna, in the year 1994, went from WWF champion headlining WrestleMania 10 in the Garden. Now in June of the same year, 3 months later, he's now a random lumberjack amidst a sea of other lumberjacks. The kind of jobber treatment that you don't really want to acknowledge as such, but I mean, let's be frank, it's the fucking jobber treatment. In any case, got off to a hot start with IRS trying to jump Tatanka right before the opening bell. He tripped him up on the ring apron, and that led to all the lumberjacks attempting to hit the ring before the opening bell, faces and heels alike. And, well, if there's one thing we know about Earl Hebner, you don't ever want to cross that guy. So he was able to eject everybody and put his foot down before things got too out of control. And to be honest with you, that was probably one of the more notable things about the first half of the match. Or quite frankly, the entire match. 5'6" Earl Hebner screaming at the boys and being an authoritative figure. More exciting than anything Crush and Tatanka were doing in the ring from a wrestling standpoint. When they came back from break, there were a lot of mat holds going on. We were about 10 minutes into the show by this point, and I could already sense myself drifting off to sleep. More of the central focus seemed to be more on Tatanka trying to go after IRS, because that was still a feud that was going on. And of course, in the world of Vince's WWF, there's the invisible barrier that exists between the ring and the floor to where guys, for whatever reason, they can never just jump out of the ring and chase after somebody. They have to pretend like they're trapped inside the ring and incapable of going outside the ring. Anyway, well, by the time we came back from break again, the match was about 15 minutes old by this point. And following the prototypical model of lumberjack matches, you're basically just sitting there buying your time and waiting for the boys on the floor to get involved. So what happens is, Crush dumps Tatanka to the floor right in front of Yokozuna. And of course, the heels are kind of known for being a little biased in these kinds of matches. So instead of just throwing Tatanka back into the ring, they all have to gang up on him until the other babyface lumberjacks get involved. They do some more spots for another minute or two until Tatanka ends up dumping Crush out to the floor. And this finishing sequence was so ridiculous. It's actually kind of funny. Typically, the babyface lumberjacks are a little more neutral. Like, they're just trying to throw the heel back in the ring without causing a ruckus. And, well, they attempted to do so. The only problem was that Crush began to fight back on the babyface lumberjacks, and he was winning. the heel began to single-handedly beat the shit out of virtually every babyface lumberjack by himself, no strings attached, until, surprise, surprise, who should then come out at the end to make the save but Lex Luger. And he winds up decking Crush with a loaded elbow and throws him back in the ring so Tatanka could steal the pin, more or less. Yes, at the end of the day, Tatanka, the babyface, got a fluke win after the heel was successfully fighting off all the babyface lumberjacks by himself, and the only reason he lost was because another babyface, who, mind you, was not even involved in the match, interfered and fucked him over. That was the story. At least what was being presented on camera. Starting to wonder if they maybe could have found a better way to not make Crush look like a sympathetic babyface, considering he was supposed to be the villain. Didn't matter, I guess, because the crowd still cheered for Tatanka going over. But the smart fan of me kind of calling bullshit. Poor Crush tried to fight off everybody and probably would have won too if Luger didn't get involved. But at the end of the day, justice was served, since Crush did virtually the same thing to screw Luger out of his King of the Ring qualifier. So I guess he did get his comeuppance, somewhat. Anyhow, that was basically half the show right there. One of the more plotting matches we've seen on Raw, and shock of all shocks, it involved slower than molasses Crush. Crush being in the most boring match on Raw. Go figure. It was kind of funny, too, seeing Mabel stand in the ring there with all the baby faces at the end, and I immediately thought to myself, oh yeah, 12 months out from now, they're about to set that guy up to win King of the Ring. Meanwhile, here he is just 1 year prior, and he's just kind of a dork. He's just one of the boys. Now, yes, he is still technically in the King of the Ring tournament this year, but at least by this point, I mean, I have to go back and maybe take a poll, but I don't think a lot of people really ever suspected he was going to be the guy to get the massive singles push the following year. We probably should have put 2 and 2 together, considering Vince loves big guys, but yeah, considering where Mabel was in the pecking order by this point, it was kind of strange. Just thinking 1 year later, and they were about to put this guy over the moon. Speaking of that King of the Ring pay-per-view, that is coming up soon, isn't it? Man, I just realized that. I saw the date during that Todd Pettingill card update. June 19th, I think it is. Got to see if that's something I can fit in the weekend show so we can actually review that pay-per-view. Oh, by the way, speaking of the Pettingill card update, normally I'm not one to linger on Todd's segments, but he actually kind of popped me here. He had a very funny line. He's going over the footage of the Bret Hart Diesel segment on Lawler's King's Court last week, where Diesel attacked Bret and laid him out with a powerbomb. And while he's raking Lawler over the coals for jumping Bret while he was down, he just casually goes, "What a creep." And I have no idea why I found that line so funny, but he got me there. He caught me off guard. I did not expect Todd Pettingill to drop a line like that, but hey, he managed to crack me up. Write that one down, because it'll never happen again. Oh, and speaking of the Lawler stuff, we had another obscure Roddy Piper skit. Literally Piper in the streets, kind of reflecting on his childhood and stuff. There was a deal where he showed us his childhood apartment, allegedly, which was basically just a rundown one-bedroom deal near a back alley. Looked like a trailer park is what it looked like. That was more so sad, but I did laugh at the part where Piper was hanging out over a bridge and pointing out into the ocean going, "Is that Lawler out there?" "Oh, no, that's a jellyfish." "They're similar, though, because neither of them have spines." Sick burn from the hot rod. I can never do a great Roddy impression, but I gave it my all there. Anyway, Piper's coming to Baltimore. Actually, I think he said he was going to burrow his way into Baltimore. Just like he apparently burrowed out of that hellhole apartment he used to live in. So apparently he's Bugs Bunny now. So that's pretty much where the show ended for all intents and purposes. No, I'm just kidding. And we still had another 20 minutes or so, but really nothing major of note happened. Bam Bam Bigelow had a squash with John Paul George McRingo. More so, it was the weekly infomercial plug segment for all the upcoming USA shows. Got to find a way to fit him into the program somehow. I have no idea what Savage was specifically promoting here, but I did catch something from Vince where he was commenting on Bob Woodward, insinuating that Hillary Clinton would one day be president. Sorry. I needed that. The jokes truly write themselves on this show, don't they? Guess this was technically during the Clinton administration, so it was timely news at the time. So Bam Bam won with a crushing splash off the ropes. More accurately, it was a spinning crushing splash. Very important to make that distinction. Anyway, that only went like 4 minutes. There was also a quick highlight reel of the D-Day Tug of War Challenge on the USS Intrepid, where I noted, oh yes, the infamous USS Intrepid. Hard to imagine that we went from Yokozuna and Lex Luger having a body slam challenge that forever shifted the landscape of Retro Raw. Now a year later, I'm watching mid-card guys do a tug of war challenge with the Marine crew. And at first I thought, oh, maybe the armed forces have a chance here. Maybe the boys will take it easy on them. And then I saw Mabel was manning the fort on the other side of the rope, and I said, good luck with that shit, boys. All the training in the world couldn't save you. Turns out they lost. And that basically took us to this King's Court segment with Lawler, the advertised talk segment with special guest Rowdy Roddy Piper that was not actually Piper because, well, you can put two and two together. By the way, I did want to note this. I loved all the camera shots they got this week of all the Burger King hats in the crowd. Especially the little girl in the front row with the Piper shirt on, missing almost her entire row of front teeth. She was a little peanut. But she let the king have it. She was not a happy camper when Lawler was talking smack. Do they still sell those Burger King crowns for all the Happy Meals? Not the Happy Meals, but the kids' meals. I used to get those when I was young. It's hard to imagine they would actually still have those, but I mean, I'm not that old. Anyhow, well, I kind of went into this expecting that it was going to suck. Well, it certainly lived up to the hype. The fake, bland, Roddy Piper was indeed very fake and very bland. He was paler than a ghost, had about as much muscle mass as Adam Cole does. The Piper imitation vocally wasn't that bad, all things considered. But the single ear piercing on the right side That one had me a little flummoxed. Anyway. Well, here's basically what I wrote down. They took one idea and they beat the joke into the ground well past the point of relevancy. It went from moderately bad to cringe bad to get to the fucking point bad to I'm about ready to sign off and be done with this program bad. It got worse as it went. Let's just say they took an idea and they said, let's run with it for 5 minutes and see how far we can get. And they got about as far as they could without sending people into the streets with torches and pitchforks. The punchline was that the fake Piper wanted to back out of the match, so Lawler made him kiss his feet and crawl out of the ring like a dog. That's pretty much all there was to it. The segment should have come with a hazardous warning message beforehand that read, may cause internal bleeding from heart failure due to suckage. I mean, even Lawler wasn't nearly strong enough to save any of this. Part of me was thinking even he knew how fucking awful it all was. I mean, he was trying to make chicken salad out of chicken you-know-what here, and Lawler's great, but he's not God. So, we'll just chalk that one up to a swing and a miss. How about that? Don't need to linger on it any longer. We can also say the same for the TV main event. And I'll say this. Once in a blue moon, you'll come across TV squashes and you can visibly see a wrestler frustrated about something. And if you're in the shoes of the job guy in that given scenario, good the fuck luck. I don't want to sit here and assume that Razor Ramon was trying to potato a young poor Jeff Hardy here. But he beat the ever-loving shit out of this guy. I didn't even recognize it was Jeff until I saw the close-up during the abdominal stretch spot. But he looked like he was having just a miserable time out there. Razor's just throwing him around recklessly, chopping the shit out of him. I mean, there was a point where he had Jeff tied up in the ropes and he's doing some trash talking to him. He goes, welcome to the big leagues, Chico. And he delivered a hard boot right on the fucking guy's temple. It looked so brutal. I wrote down here, I think we may have just captured history at this exact moment, wherein Jeff Hardy was forever slated to become a megastar in the business. All it took was for him to go out there and get shit on by Scott Hall. And that was where Vince said, all right, pal, you got something. If you could survive Scott Hall going into business for himself, you got it made. I mean, even Earl Hebner wasn't going to get heavily involved in the middle of that. He said, Razor's pissed. It's out of my hands, dude. If Jeff dies, he dies. I take this as an instance where Jeff said, all right, I could make millions doing swantons off of ladders through tables for the rest of my life, or I could go out there and wrestle Scott Hall again. Sign me up for TLC. I don't want any part of that guy ever again. So, well, you'll be happy to know in the end, Razor did not wind up killing him. But it was definitely the pure definition of a squash. Because Razor squashed this dude like a bug. Speaking of bugs, whichever one was crawling up Razor's ass at this point, I wonder who the culprit was that got him hot. Because poor Jeff felt the brunt of that impact. Maybe he was pissed that Vince sent him out there to be a lumberjack earlier on. Anyway, well, we did have a quick Paul Bear cameo here. Basically calling out Ted DiBiase and being sure to let us know that he will not be producing The Undertaker anytime soon. And it was at that moment where I said, oh boy. Because if you know the timeline of where this is all eventually leading, ugh. No, I'm not going to spoil it. It's still a ways out, but the seed was planted here. It's horrible. Don't get me wrong. The eventual payoff was certainly not worth the wait. But we're still in the early stages of the DiBiase $1 Million Corporation storyline, so there's much more to come. All in all, Raw rolls on, as we like to casually say here on the channel. This was kind of the regular definition of one of those roller Raws. Stuff happened. Some of it was good. A lot of it was bad. And a lot of other stuff just sort of happened with little rhyme or reason. There were still a few things to note, I guess. Most notably, an all-time horrible Raw segment with Lawler and the fake Piper, as well as Scott Hall going into business for himself and shooting on Jeff Hardy in a TV squash. It was more notable than anything in that lumberjack match. I'll tell you that much. And to this point, we are, I believe, about 3 weeks out from the 94 King of the Ring pay-per-view. The brackets are officially set. Come to think of it, I think the whole card is officially set by now. Unless there's like another match or two they have to throw in there, but I think they covered their ground on just about everything. It will be an interesting card to recap when we get there. And I do plan on making that part of the show. I don't think there's anything upcoming this weekend, or I should say that weekend with Modern Wrestling, so I should be able to fit that in and reasonably get through it. But for now, we'll keep trudging through the next few Raw reports and see how things shape up for the remainder of the summer. SummerSlam 94. I remember a couple things on that show. End of sentence. Well, in the meantime, I guess we can transition over to SmackDown and see how things shape up for this year's SummerSlam. It ain't looking too pretty right now. Oh boy, SmackDown from whatever the hell the date was. June 2nd. Sure, we'll go with that. Boy, did I miss talking about this show last week. Couldn't sleep for days. Just the thought of what possibly could have happened on this must-see episodic television known as Friday Night SmackDown. Well, thankfully, at least I didn't miss the crowning achievement of our Universal Champion Roman Reigns. And based on the little video pre-tape they aired for his celebratory 1,000-day reign, now I know why Cody did the job at WrestleMania a few months back. It was all so they can make sure they got the chance to air this highlight package. And, well, I'll have you know, not that this is groundbreaking news, you all know how exemplary WWE is when it comes to production value. This was another knock it out of the park type video. The one thing they always get right, the highlight packages. God, are they always tremendous. Basically just running down Roman's entire timeline for the day he became champion up to where we are now, basically. And God, some of these matches I totally forgot about, man. Especially a lot of the earlier ones that sort of preceded his 500th day as champion. Like going back to matches like the one he had at WrestleMania 37 2 years ago with Edge and Bryan Danielson. God, it's almost insane to think back to a time when Danielson was still under contract with the WWE. It seems like he's been in AEW for an eternity. You know, and obviously the packages were split up throughout the show, so they didn't just cram it all at the beginning. They kind of spliced everything throughout the 2-hour program. The one at the top of the program was sort of an overview, but it was a central theme for the night. And it was good in some instances because it helped to break up the flow of a lot of the bad stuff for the regular show we got this week. The other thing I thought was cool is that in between the highlight reels of all the notable big title defenses, they had that streaming ticker counting the days as champion, and they also had all the former world champions from previous eras flashing up on screen. That was really cool to see. They even had CM Punk up there for a minute or two, which is another thing I almost totally forgot about until I saw him holding the title. Yeah, remember back when they were making a big deal out of the CM Punk 430-something day reign as world champion? We all thought that was a crowning achievement. Pales in comparison now, doesn't it? But seeing his graphic flash up for all of like 8 seconds, it was still kind of odd. I still kind of thought they blackballed Punk from WWE's history altogether, but there he was. And there were other highlight reels throughout the show. I think they had the WrestleMania 38 one. They had the one with him and Sammy at the Elimination Chamber show this past year. So, I mean, they at least highlighted the significant matches. They didn't go through every single title defense, which is fine. Just kind of highlighting the notable ones and trying to piece it all together coherently. Like I said, that was very well done. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort to go into that. So, hats off to the production team for that. The other theme they had going on throughout the show were all the Money in the Bank qualifiers. Well, 2 specifically. And I guess that pay-per-view is coming up, isn't it? What are we, about 4 weeks out from that one? So, goody. I just got done coming down from that Night of Champions show last weekend, and now I have to mentally prepare myself for another 3-hour marathon on the cock. And as you'll come to find out later on, they're still doing the 50-50 egalitarian split with the men's and women's Money in the Banks. Because, of course, the marketing strategy is, well, the men can do it, therefore the women ought to be able to do it also. But, of course, it's only fair. Even though every Money in the Bank match I've seen from the women has been atrocious beyond belief. But it is just sort of built into the framework now. And they don't even question it. It's not even an attraction match anymore. It's like every year there's going to be a girls and guys Money in the Bank match. That's the way it is. Whether or not we like it. Now, before I skip to the first of the 2 qualifiers, I'll just briefly touch on this. You all heard me review that Pretty Deadly debut a couple weeks back. The match where I spend most of the time trying to figure out why exactly they're working the toe of the line effeminate gimmick. I mean, I get it's Pride Month and all, but doesn't necessarily mean I want to see it. Plus, the debut match was not really all that good from what I remember. Figuring they got called up from NXT, kind of went in expecting they were going to be at least moderately good in the ring. They just kind of came off like 2 green guys that still need a lot of work and probably a gimmick change. So I pretty much asserted that I would be forever boycotting Elton Prince and Armani Remington matches. Whatever the other guy's name is, I can't remember. I know there's a blonde one and a brunette one. Beyond that, they're very interchangeable to me. If you had any interest, though, they were part of a 6-man tag teaming with poor old Austin Theory, and they all wrestled the Brawling Brutes. The gay models had skin-tight crop tops on, and Theory pinned Ridge Holland. And the moment I saw Theory with his arms wrapped around Pretty Deadly in the aisleway, I forever stamped that as the moment that his career was shot and buried. Poor Theory. Anyhow, we were about a half hour into this thing before I actually watched an entire full-length match of any kind. When you take into account the Night of Champions recaps, the Roman packages, and the Paul Heyman Solo Sikoa interaction in the back, it ate up a lot of screen time. Factor in commercials, too. Gotta mention that. I mean, part of me was wondering whether or not they ought to have just made the entire show its own highlight reel. To be fair, most of them were better than the actual TV matches we got this week. Take, for example, the next match. Also a match that I contemplated fast-forwarding through. That was until I learned who their opponents were going to be. It's an OC tag match. And of course, as soon as the names Carl Anderson and or Luke Gallows are mentioned, I immediately feel the urge to get up and go use the bathroom. Because both of those guys' names just give me gas. However, in learning that their opponents for this week were going to be Hit Row, I immediately perked up. Mostly because I knew Top Dollar was going to be involved here. And you just never know what the fuck that guy's going to botch next when he gets into the ring. Now he is the type of must-see attraction that ought to be getting the monster push heavily on this show. He really is must-see. You must tune in to see the sheer and utter horrors that await whenever that guy gets in the ring to wrestle. And the best part is that even WWE acknowledges how fucking rotten the guy is. Now it's just an ongoing joke. Whenever he gets in the ring, the announcers are outright making fun of the fact that the guy is basically a piece of shit. Of course, they don't say it out loud, but I mean, you can pretty much figure that one out on your own. Adonis is mostly inoffensive in the ring, so he's less fun to make fun of. I can still find ways to make fun of BFAP and her outlaw-looking bullshit she does whenever she gets involved. I particularly like the spot here where she went to try and throw a worked punch at Carl Anderson while he was hung up in the ropes. And this worked punch basically consisted of BFAP blatantly making a fist and proceeding to punch her own hand. A fucking blind dude could have seen how fake that was. Glorious. I went back and watched it like 4 times. I was laughing so hard. I'm not shitting you. You don't believe me? Go back and watch the match for yourself. She literally balled up a fist and punched her own hand. And Carl Anderson sold it. What a Nimrod. Both of them. Anyway, the match was mostly boring. All 4 of these guys suck, but at least Anderson and Gallows can do a couple moves. They just bore everybody into a coma with everything they do. They got the personality of tree bark. But they won with a magic killer. And after Top Dollar tried to attack the alleged baby faces, AJ then hit him with a springboard forearm, and that was about it. So are the OC baby faces? I'm legitimately asking. I have no idea. It's hard to tell when the crowd doesn't react to about a quarter of the group. They pop for AJ's shit. The others, I don't think they care. And who could blame them? It's interesting how AJ was one of the 2 guys wrestling for the World Heavyweight Championship on pay-per-view less than a week ago. Here he is on the following week's TV show, and he's not even part of the winning team combination. He's just on the floor playing cheerleader for the bald, boring jabronis. Great follow-up. It's almost as good as Tony Khan immediately slapping Jungle Jackass and Darby Allin back into the mid-card, just literally 5 days after they wrestled for the top AEW title on pay-per-view. It's almost like these people have no idea what they're doing. So following that, well, point blank, we had the best segment of all time. When I say this might have been my favorite moment in all of wrestling in 2023, let me assure you that it's going to be very hard to top the comedy like the one we got in this segment. I alluded to it at the top of the program this week. This was the segment I was referring to. The kind of train wreck level television that is so ungodly wretched beyond belief, it ends up superseding bad and becomes beautifully laughable by comparison. Think back to some of those classic AEW train wreck moments. the Jade Cargill debut, the fucking Maki Ito stuff, the kind of hokey bad television that you just have to laugh at because there's no other way to get any kind of joy or value out of it except just to laugh at the sheer stupidity. This, I think, was WWE's modern day Jade Cargill debut, where the train wreck TV is so unparalleled. It starts off just kind of generically bad, kind of like most typical WWE programming, where there's a segment going on and the material is not all that compelling. And it keeps going and going and going and going. And you start to realize that it's really, really fucking awful. But it actually kind of inverts on itself and starts to bring you levels of entertainment that you just never thought were possible. I will do my best to break this all down, and I will try to maintain my composure. No promises. I still don't think I'll be able to do this segment justice by the end of it. It began with another Grayson Waller Experience Talk segment, with all the lighting and the palm trees and the rigmarole that we got last time they booked one of these talk segments. Still would like to know whether or not the guy can fucking wrestle worth a shit. Maybe we'll find out in the next 8 months when they decide to finally book him in a match, but for now they're going to keep on milking these Death TV talk segments. And his guest this time, the current reigning Raw Women's Champion, who was wrestling on SmackDown, Asuka, who just recently dethroned Bianca Belair at the Night of Champions card after gouging her eyes with blue food coloring. That was how they decided to end Bianca's long-standing title reign at 400-something odd days. And, well, I guess we can start with this, just to kind of demonstrate the model of what we're having to work with here. For anybody that knows Asuka, for anybody that has seen her work, for those that have ever heard her cut a promo before, I think it's safe to say that English, not her most fluid language. Is that a fair analysis? Well, albeit, I don't really know how WWE would go about scripting dialogue for Asuka, because, quite frankly, I'm not entirely sure that most people in the writer's room actually speak Japanese. This is something that I've actually been kind of curious about. Like, how do the writers exactly prepare material for Asuka? Do they try to write stuff down for her? Or do they just say, go out there and say some shit for a while and see what happens? Which is by its own right fantastic, because you can't really predict what she's going to say or do. Therefore, there are so many opportunities for comedy to play out that you literally cannot script out because you have no idea what's going to happen. So, of course, Grayson's out there trying to go over how Asuka beat Bianca at Night of Champions, and he gives her the floor to comment. And the best I can come up with is, she said some words. Some of it sounded like it possibly could have been Japanese. Other parts sounded like she took about 12 ounces of water and tried to gargle while also speaking. I actually took the time to write down one of her exact quotes, and I think I got this verbatim. It was very riveting TV, but I will throw this out there as well. I'm not, how you say, fluid in my Japanese verbal skills, but I will give it my best shot here. I believe her quote was, "Mr. Boy got it." And I want you to keep in mind here, Asuka's incoherent psychobabble, not even the best part. The best part is the entire time she's talking, I am fixated on Grayson Waller's expression, which I can merely best describe as him going, "What the fuck is happening right now?" So, well, that was hysterical by its own right. But this next part, I could not do it justice if I tried. So I actually decided to pull out one of the classic FSWR tricks here. And I actually scrubbed the audio for this. I knew that I would never be able to replicate this on the show. But this moment was too good not to capture. So I am now going to play for you a segment that actually happened on television. The verbal altercation between Asuka and Iyo Sky. Because here's exactly what I wrote down in my notes. The moment. Didn't even take me 2 seconds. The split moment that Io's music hit, I said, "Oh no." Because in my head, subconsciously, I think I knew what was coming. And I was trying so hard to mentally prepare myself for it. But when they started going at it, I was howling so hard. I could not even feasibly attempt to write any of this dialogue down. So again, this is the audio that I clipped here. I hope the quality is good enough because goddamn is it hilarious.
Iyo Sky が新チャンピオンになりますからよろしゅうチャイルド子供はねここに来ちゃいけないんだようるせえクソやらバカクソやろバカクソやバカ
I did not approve.
Now, I'm sure you're all thinking the same thing I was, of course, thinking the entire time this is happening. A, why the fuck is this happening? What am I watching right now? This is beyond awful. But at the same time, you just can't take your eyes off it. And you know, this had to be a rib. There's no way that Hunter didn't take one look at this and say, this could be legendary. There's no way we can't book this. Just having Iyo and Asuka go out there and scream at each other in Japanese like two wild banshees. Fuck if anybody knew what they were going to say to each other, except a small subset of the English population that for whatever reason goes to these shows and speaks perfect Japanese, which is like probably 0.00000000004 of the population. That moment right there was awesome in and of itself, but then it gets a million times better. Because whose music should then hit but Bayley? And the first thing out of Michael Cole's mouth, and I quote, well, there go the ratings. Now, of course, the story is that apparently there's an ongoing beef with Michael Cole and Bayley that, honestly, I can't even explain the kayfabe feud. She hates him, he hates her. We don't really know why, but they do, and the whole thing doesn't really make any sense. But I just remember laughing at that line because I thought, oh, Bayley is the reason that the segment is going to die in the ratings. Is she now? Not fucking Asuka and Iyo bantering at each other in Japanese for 5 minutes straight. No, that'll hold the audience. But Bayley is going to be the cause of death for this segment. All right, let me write that one down. So, well, God bless her. She's out there attempting to save this tragedy from happening. Well, she couldn't save it, but she gave it the old college try. Specifically mentioning that one of Damage Control are going to win Money in the Bank. To which I then wondered to myself, oh yeah, whatever happened to Dakota? Where was she in all this? Probably saying to herself, well, this TV segment is going to die a death in the ratings, and quite frankly, I don't want to be any part of it, brother. So she hung out in the back and left these girls to piss in the wind. And of course, as if the segment could not possibly get any fucking worse by this point, who should then interrupt? Oh yes, by the way, this segment kept going. We are not even halfway done yet. Who should now interrupt but Shotzi's green hair? Everybody's favorite indie job girl. Whatever her name is, Shotzi. Not Shotzi Blackheart, but just Shotzi. And of course, she's decked out in all the tattoos and the weird skimpy clothing and the over excessive use of eye makeup and the piercings. Just all the typical Gen Z stuff that sort of sends dudes running from women because everything about them screams, red flag, do not approach. You wouldn't catch me ever approaching Shotzi in public. Avoid her like the plague. Oh, and surprise, her promo was fucking rotten beyond belief. I believe an exact quote from her. I tried to write this down, and I think I got it. There's nothing more I would like to do than crush your dreams with the help of some cold, hard steel. Because if there's anybody made for pure chaos of Money in the Bank, not done yet, by the way, I'm still going with this overly rehearsed dialogue she was trying to spew out here. Because if there's anybody that has been made for the pure chaos of Money in the Bank, it's me. Unquote. Somebody wrote that down on a piece of paper and they handed it to Miss Shotzi and they said, go out there and say this. Who the hell wrote that? And why were they not immediately fired for having come up with it? Who in their right mind thought it would be a good idea to allow that shit to air out in public? I almost felt sorry for poor old Shotzi here. And I don't even like the oddball chick. I can't stand her. I wish she'd go away and never darken the screen with her green-ass hair ever again. But I actually kind of had some sympathy for her having to go out there and regurgitate that repulsive dialogue. She's also very unconvincing in her delivery because everything about Shotzi is unconvincing. And by that point, the ring just kind of cluttered with a bunch more girls. And I had's about all I could take by that point. Because there was more. Lacey Evans interrupted. And she started doing all her girl power dialogue. And then, who should then interrupt? But Zelina Vega. And actually, she had probably the best bit of dialogue here at the end when she came out and told Lacey that if she traded in her piss-soaked boots for red bottoms, she still wouldn't be half the woman that Zelina is. And, well, since we've already towed the racial line a time or two during this promo, may as well go all in at this point. Did anybody else pick up on Zelina Vega all of a sudden dropping in the Brandy Rhodes black accent? Where all of a sudden she went from Latina to like full-fledged big mean mama? She got the friggin' accent down. And meanwhile, the girls are sort of just rambling and screaming at each other for a while. And Grayson's in there popping hardwood and begging for more party girls to show up. He was having the fucking time of his life. I don't blame him. And unfortunately, they had to pitch to their break shortly thereafter, but let me assure you, we are documenting this moment for the ages. I'm not even kidding you. This was the best segment of all time. Easily the highlight of 2023, no question. I went back and watched this segment in full after the show was over. It was so damn good. And I will say this right now. If we get more women's segments like this every week on WWE television, I would be all on board for the women to get more screen time. Fuck having to watch them wrestle. I could go without that. Just give me more Zelina Vega cutting dramatic bad bitch promos on everybody. And more of Asuka and Iyo cursing at each other in Japanese. I'm all in. You could book that stuff every week. The fucking stereotypes were through the roof in this segment. Let's just ride that calamity all the way to the finish line. This segment went so off the rails in a hurry, and I loved every moment of it. You cannot rewrite comedy like this if you tried. And the best part, like I've been saying at the top when we started reviewing this, there's no way on God's green earth they could have planned for this. This fell into place way too perfectly. They do not have this kind of genius level creative team to where they could script comedy like this. I wish this could have been the entire show. Just having all the catty girls go out there and yell and talk over one another for 8 straight minutes. My God, give them the floor. The best thing women ever do is nat and bitch at each other. I could watch more shit like that. At least for my sanity, it would work. My God, this was fantastic. I have to, hold on. I do have a audio snippet for that. All in good faith, people. All in good faith. Wow. Just wow. French kiss. Beautiful stuff. Unfortunately, the next match was not as legendary as the preceding girls segment. It was a girls segment, but it was not legendary. Zelina Vega and Lacey Evans had their Money in the Bank qualifier. Thankfully, it was short to where I couldn't really rip it to shreds all that hard. It only went like 3 minutes. Zelina got beat up for like 90% of the match, and then she won out of nowhere with a code red. And meanwhile, Lacey continues to spin her wheels and not really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, but she's still on the roster, by golly. And they're going to keep paying her to be completely useless. So, well, considering the women kind of stole the show this week, it was definitely going to be hard for anything to top that Grayson Waller debacle. LA Knight tried, but try as he may, I don't think he fully succeeded. But he had a match with Montez Ford here. It was our men's Money in the Bank qualifier. By default, it was probably the best match on the show. Also good that he won, which I'm always kind of skeptical of when I watch an LA Knight match. I mean, you never know whether or not the guy's going to job or not. It's kind of unpredictable. As a match, there wasn't much to it. Not really going to sit here and bore you with the details of this stuff. Knight went for blunt force trauma in the corner, but Ford tried to stack him up with a roll through. And the Knight kind of reversed that and grabbed a handful of ropes to steal the win. Good enough for me. Winning as heels should. And it brings the guy one step closer to possibly becoming Mr. Money in the Bank. Again, it's hard to ever tell what they're ever going to do with LA Knight from a booking standpoint. Everything with him is so stop and start. I probably want to wait and see what the rest of the playing field is before I judge the other participants and consider who I think ought to win. Knight would definitely be my first choice. Now, the other issue right now is that since they once again have two world champions, if Knight were to, say, win, but then he would end up challenging for Rollins' belt, technically he's challenging for the secondary world title. And while some people might not see it the same way, it's basically the reality of where we're at right now with having two top world champions again. Because somebody thought that would be a good idea. But honestly, who even knows if they thought that far out with trying to figure out what belt the Money in the Bank winner is going to cash in on? For all we know, they probably don't even have a clue who's going to win the fucking match, period. And the show's in like 3 or 4 weeks. That'll be a Vince call. They'll go in with a game plan, and then right at the last second they'll say, "No, not this time. We have to have fill in the blank win." Who's even in that match right now? Didn't they already say that they had a few qualifiers? Let me see here. I could have sworn Cole said they already had like 1 or 2 Money in the Bank matches already. Good old trusty wiki page here. Let's see what they have. Yeah, they got like half the fucking playing field. Alright, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it looks like we're going to have 9 guys in the men's match. Currently, we have Ricochet, Shinsuke Nakamura, LA Knight, Santos Escobar, Mustafa Ali, Butch, Baron Corbin, Matt Riddle, and then a TBA. Oh, no, I read that wrong. It's Butch or Baron Corbin. So those guys are going to have a qualifier, and then the winner is going to be in the match. Oh, God, what if they have Corbin win that qualifying match? That would be like Vince. It's like, who's the guy that should not win Money in the Bank? Out of all the participants, the one that should not go over, Corbin's the number 1 guy on the top of the list, so Vince would go, "Let's have Corbin win. That'll be such good shit." I could see it now. Fucking Roman Reigns versus Baron Corbin. Oh, yeah. I'm getting hard just thinking about it. Anyway, now we're getting to the last segment of the show here, so. Well, I had a momentary false alarm here. There was some weird, bizarre video package with snow and trees and Latin text and satanic rituals with burning people in Halloween masks. My worst suspicions immediately came to the forefront, thinking, oh, fuck me, Bray Wyatt's coming back. But no, it turns out it was a VTR for the new girls team that showed up from NXT a while back. Hopefully that's all it was. But you never know with WWE. In any case, I think we're about ready to round this out with the main event segment. Wasn't entirely sure how things are going to come full circle with the Roman material, but now they ended up tying together some loose ends from the Night of Champions show. And I'll go ahead and say this right now. They gave this final segment a lot of time. I think in counting, I got like 20 minutes altogether if you include the commercial they threw in there right before the Usos came out. So there is a lot of stuff to recap here, and I'm going to do my best to try and bring everything full circle, at least touching on all the key points. Now, the entire show was built around Roman's 1,000th day title celebration, so figuring WWE likes to dish out a new belt design every 5 months for no discernible reason, it was only fitting that Roman would wind up having his own custom belt design by some point. And I guess it now supersedes the 2 championships he was currently holding, because Hunter basically gave Roman the big fanfare-like introduction here, so he could put over this prestigious moment in history and present Roman with a, drumroll, new belt. A custom singular world championship. And it's more or less unimpressive looking, like the majority of most WWE belt designs these days. I mean, the Universal title was basically the WWE title, but spray painted red. This newly designed Universal title is basically the same thing, but spray painted in gold. It's slightly more visually appealing than the red belt. Not by much, though. Anyway, Roman posed with it so they could get all their screen caps for all the article headlines. You know, pyro shot off the whole 9 yards. That all went about 5 minutes, and really wasn't as exciting as you might think it would be. But they changed the pace a little bit here, because the Usos dropped in for a surprise visit. Now, we were told that Adam Pearce ensured that there would be an extra round of security surrounding the building so that Jimmy and Jay could not get in. So, of course, here they were, just kind of popping in unscathed and unflanked by security. Cool. Adam Pearce says, the Usos will not be in the building. Fast forward an hour later, here come the Usos, just casually strolling in. So I don't know what was going on there. Either Adam lied and did not hire an extra row of security to watch the building, or maybe the Usos paid off the security team and nobody else was clued in. So, of course, naturally, when the Usos come out, well, obviously that's the best time to pitch to commercial, right? Yeah, they did that. And when they came back, the Usos were standing toe-to-toe with Roman. And I'm like, did we not just see Jimmy Uso kick Roman in the face less than 7 days ago? Why are they standing face-to-face with Roman right now? Moreover, why is Roman not punching this guy in the face? Beats me. But Roman wanted to have Jay do the dirty work for him. So he's demanding that Jay super kicks Jimmy, just like Jimmy did to Roman at the pay-per-view. And that doesn't really go over well because Jay's hesitant to pull the trigger. It is the current battle of the brothers right now, where the Usos are in conflict with wanting to side with Roman, but their brotherly bond is too tight to let go of. So now Jimmy's talking about how Roman lost the plot. He's been so overcome with greed and power that he's sacrificed his own brothers. And they're trying to get everybody back on the same page to clear the air. They're warning Solo that Roman's going to do the same thing to him as he did to the Usos. It's actually straight out of the playbook of the same stuff that Samuel was telling Jimmy and Jay on TV right before Mania. So, well, that was kind of a nice tie-in, I guess. And when Roman goes to hand the mic over to Solo so he can see where he falls in line, Solo basically acknowledges that Roman is his tribal chief. However, the Usos are still his brothers. Now, of course, that gets a massive ovation from the crowd. Gets an even bigger ovation when Solo actually walks over and stands by the Usos, leaving Roman by himself. And this is where things get extra heated, because when Jimmy asks Roman what he's going to do now, Roman tries to fire back at him. And that is when that's when Jimmy pie faces Roman, spawning a holy shit chant from the people. Think about that for a minute, too. Not a super kick, not even a sucker punch, a palm face. That lit the crowd up. You don't see that too often. Now, of course, Roman is about to blow a gasket in all this. But Jay steps in to try to get cooler heads to prevail. He says they need to package things up right now and get back together. What the fuck was that? Did I just break my chair? I don't know what I did. In any case, no, this is all for the betterment of the bloodline. They all need each other. So they need to drop all the drama bullshit and reunite as one family. Because they are the ones, as we all know. And this is actually pretty well done. You know, Roman getting all emotional there, going in for the hug on Jimmy, making it look like things are about to settle down and that he's come to his senses and they're going to get back on the same page again. And right as Roman goes to raise the mic up, the facial mood changes. And the camera catches it so perfectly too. And he just sternly goes, "No." And he backs up. And Solo, who we were led to believe was siding with his brothers here, turns and he decks Jimmy with a Samoan spike. Down goes Jimmy. And Jay's still standing there conflicted, not really budging a muscle. And this is kind of interesting. Roman and Solo leave together. Cole sells the people on the story that Solo took Roman over his own brothers. And while Roman and Solo are walking up the aisleway, Paul Lee taps Roman on the shoulder and goes, "What about Jay?" And then Roman turns to look at the ring and he insinuates that he'll fall in line like he always does. So they're still trying to play up Jay as the feeble-minded puppet that can't make decisions for himself. So he's still technically not ousted from the group yet. And that was kind of the interesting thing I took away from this. I'm like, well, they attacked Jimmy, but they didn't touch Jay. He just sort of stood there and was mystified by what was happening. And I like that because it's an added wrinkle to the story that I'm sure will be brought to the centerfold later on once Jay kind of stands up for himself and evidently kicks Roman in the face too. Because remember, that was also one of the big storylines coming out of the Night of Champions show. Only Jimmy was the one that struck. Jay was still hesitant. He didn't end up lifting a finger to help kick Roman. That was all Jimmy. So I could see a scenario play out where Jay finally musters up the courage to deliver the deed to Roman. I guess we'll see where that all takes us. You know, as for this whole thing, again, you can kind of envision what this is all setting up. You know, I could see some kind of tag match with Roman and Solo going up against Jimmy and Jay. I think that's a more likely scenario than maybe trying to do Roman versus Jimmy in a singles match for the title. I just don't see that as a gripping sell point for one of the Big Four pay-per-views, provided that's something they would end up actually booking for a Big Four show. You know, the tag match, I think you can milk more drama. So I think that's more apt to happen. All in all, though, it was a fine closer to the program. And you know what? I got to give them credit. They sort of reinvigorated my interest a little bit with the Bloodline story. I kind of thought they hit their peak after the Mania fallout because there was a period there where going into that Extreme Rules show, there didn't really seem to be any kind of definitive direction. But now they kind of introduced a new dynamic to the story and it's working. The Sammy KO chapter, they kind of put to bed now. And now we're seeing the brothers kind of fall under their own umbrella. And that's honestly probably even more intriguing than a lot of the Sammy stuff that was going on prior to WrestleMania. Not to try and undersell any of that, because Sammy was great, but I think the rest of the Bloodline story at this point kind of hinges on Roman betraying his own brothers for power and dominance. And it's something that makes it a lot easier to sympathize with the Usos over. And I've been talking for a long time how the Usos just don't do a whole lot for me on television anymore. I mean, their matches to me just, I don't know, they don't hit home. But the stuff they interact with Roman on the TV show and the angles and the promos, that stuff usually works for me. And as long as they're kind of synced up with Roman and Solo in some way, I'm okay with seeing the Usos wrestle. So I think this will wind up panning out in the end. And it's been a bumpy road for the last couple months, but they turned the chapter on the story, and now I'm kind of hooked again. For right now, I'm on board. Oh boy. The show took a long time to get through. And it still kind of sucked. But my God, that fucking women's segment. And you know, you throw in the main event angle there. Maybe I have to retract my statement a little bit from what I said at the beginning. I said a lot of WWE television is pretty boring a lot of the time. And I'm not going to deny that because, I mean, God, you watch an episode of SmackDown or Raw most weeks, it's pretty obvious the shows are dreary and dull beyond belief. But this was one of the more entertaining SmackDowns I've watched in a long time. A train wreck level horrible segment and a moderately good to really good main event bloodline angle. I consider that a win. You know, the matches were never going to be anything to write home about, but sometimes you have those fill-ins that make the shows worthwhile. This show, this particular SmackDown, it was far from boring. I got a lot of sick entertainment out of this one. I doubt it'll duplicate on next week's show, because, my God, that women's segment was for the ages. I think I might have to go back and watch it again after I'm done recording here, which I think would have been my 5th time going back to relive it. Oh, the other thing, too, I didn't mention here, the Roman video packages, those are really well done. I love the highlight reels. I like the whole timeline, going through all the past world champions, you know, going by numbers and calculating every world champion's title reign all the way up to Roman's 1,000th day reign. Now, he's still not topped out the pack yet, but what is he? I believe number 4 in the rankings of all-time world champions in the WWF or WWE. It's impressive. It really is. You know, in some ways you could argue it's artificial because WWE plans that out. But, oh man, you look in today's era where it's so hard to come by champions that even last a year, much less 3 or 4. Roman deserves a lot of credit, man. He's worked smart. He's stayed healthy. He's put in the effort. It's a very difficult job what he does. And yeah, I know he works a limited schedule, but hey, if WWE was going to go all in with him as one of the longest reigning world champions of the modern era, they needed to make sure they were very careful with how they booked him. And they put him in some pretty high-profile matches before. I mean, they weren't just sending Roman out there to work 2-minute squashes. They were having him do some pretty lengthy matches at various points. And he's come out on top. He's been able to keep himself in good shape. Knock on wood, no injuries. Nothing that kind of hindered his performance. So, got to give him credit there. Like I said, in today's era where people get hurt so often, it's hard to have long-term world champions. It really is. So anyway, I think we can sort of round things out here. Well, make sure you guys comment and subscribe and do all that good stuff in the comment section. And you can also find us on Rumble, too, if I did not mention that. The link for that is also in the description box. So the next couple weeks will kind of be more low-key compared to normal. The Money in the Bank special, that is coming up on, what's the date? July 1st. Okay, so we're a little bit of ways out from that. And obviously I'm going to review the King of the Ring 94 special. That'll be a couple weeks out. AEW, I don't even know what's coming down the pike from there. I think the Forbidden Door show is next. And that is scheduled for Sunday, June 25th. So, yeah, they're not that far out from now. My God. And they don't have anything announced for that card yet. At least as far as I know. The fuck? They do have matches announced for that card. Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay for the IWGP United States title, and Bryan Danielson versus Kazuchika Okada. Yeah, all right then. Be nice to know how the fuck those matches came together. Other than you have to watch New Japan. Fuck you. How about that? Well, I mean, if I learned anything from last year's Forbidden Door show, shouldn't expect a whole lot of common sense to be coming out of that one. Because that show is a hodgepodge of randomness and obscure matches out the wazoo. And I'm sure this year will be no different. Anyway. Thanks for watching, people. Stay tuned for more on the channel, and that's all for this one. Take care. Peace out.